Alright, so we got the chapter 184 spoiler, and we're going in a very different direction in this chapter than we were in the previous one because we're coming off of that big Hikari domain expansion exposition chapter. And by the way, if you're confused about that, please check out the video that I made on that chapter. I think it'll help you get a better understanding of it if you don't already. But at the end of that chapter, we saw Hikari maybe defeat Charles. In my opinion, it seemed like it was going to lead to, this chapter, but I guess we're not, because there's like no mention of Hikari or what happened with that stuff in this chapter. Like, we're going into completely new stuff here, and hey, I'm on board with it because I'm ready to move on from the Hikari stuff, to be honest. But anyway, in this chapter, we're seeing Panda versus Kashimo. That's right, we're going right into Kashimo's fight, and unfortunately, Panda is going to be the one who encounters him. And this actually kind of makes sense because Panda and Hikari were the ones who originally supposed to go after Kashimo, and I guess Hikari kind of got sidetracked and wound up running into Charles instead. So after Panda encounters Kashimo, Panda gets a strong blow, which tears away his back, but it gets recovered, and Panda turns into his gorilla mode and hits Kashimo, but it doesn't really phase him. So yeah, this isn't really surprising to me because I expect Kashimo to be one of the strongest players in the culling game, possibly, at least that we've seen so far, because he was kind of built up that way. And let me just give you a rundown of him real quick. So I think the first time we saw him was in chapter 158 when the Kogane suddenly appeared in front of Yuji for the first time. It said a player has added a new rule to the culling game. Rule 9, players shall have access to information on other players such as name points, number of rules added, and current colony. And we find out that it was Kashimo who was the one who added that rule to the game. And then we see Kashimo like just destroyed this random sorcerer, like literally blew a hole through him and put a huge crater in the wall behind him. And Kashimo said they're all too weak, referring to the sorcerers that he's been fighting, but he also says they were much tougher 400 years ago. So I guess that's giving us insight into the time period that Kashimo is coming from. And I also think that's the time that Ryu is coming from as well, right? Because when he was facing off with Akotsu, it said the intense look in Ishigori's eyes expressed over 400 years of hunger and thirst. So I don't know if that necessarily means he exactly is coming from 400 years, but I guess it's heavily implied that he was. Meaning that Kashimo and Ryu came from the same period, I guess, which is interesting because they both seem to have like a similar profile, like looking for tough opponents and never having them. So why didn't they just face each other back in the day, unless they came from two different parts of the world and they just never ran into each other, maybe. But this brings us to Kashimo's big defining trait, I guess, because he immediately asks, where is Sukuna? And keep that in mind because it's going to be coming up in these spoilers, and I'm assuming that this is Kashimo's purpose in the culling game. Now, we're only going off of so much information, we barely know anything about this guy yet, but it seems like what I was saying with him being similar to Ryu. Maybe he was like one of the strongest back in his time and there was no one really challenging him, and maybe he was also like a Sukuna stan, or he just knew about Sukuna and always wished that he could have faced somebody that powerful, because I guess we could just assume that Sukuna has just been a legend for the last 1,000 years, like the entire time after he became a cursed object. Like his legend just was passed down that whole entire time, so everyone within that time span knew that he was like the king of curses. And I guess that intrigued Kashimo, and then one day, Kenjaku came across Kashimo and was like, hey, if you make a deal with me, you can fight Sukuna. Like, hey, if you just become a cursed object right now, I can guarantee that in like 400 years, I'll have a worthy vessel eat your cursed object and then you'll become them, but you'll have to participate in the culling game that I'm going to make. And within that culling game, I can promise you that Sukuna will be there and you can fight against him. That kind of seems like what's going on here. I mean, it could be wrong and it's something completely left field, but right now that kind of seems what the play is. Now, another thing about Kashimo is that he had 200 points and that he only spent 100 100 of them to make that rule to give information on the other players. And as far as I know, he still has like 100 points in the bank to be able to make a new rule. That's actually why they wanted to go after him, because when they looked at the chart of the players, it was him and Higuruma who had enough points to be able to make rules. And also, pretty sure he added that rule disclosing information on the other players so he could see if Sukuna was in the lineup. But anyway, back to Panda versus Kashimo in this chapter. So we just said Panda turns into gorilla mode and hits Kashimo, but it doesn't really phase him. Panda's right arm gets torn out in a counterattack and is beaten to a pulp. So let's just go over to Ducky spoilers real quick and see how they match up with Miyamura's. So Panda encounters Hajime Kashimo and Panda tries to hide by pretending he is a real panda. After getting a strong punch from Kashimo, Panda turns into a gorilla to fight, but it doesn't work out too well. Alright, so let me give you a little warning for this next portion of spoilers. Miyamura himself is unsure if these are true or not. I mean, he was originally unsure about this chapter just revolving around Kashimo going against Panda, but then it was later confirmed that it was, and also of course it lines up with Ducky spoilers, but he's still unsure about this next portion. So Kashimo asks him, "Are you Sukuna?" And Panda says, "Nope." And then Kashimo says, "You're lying." And then apparently Panda switches into his sister mode. So I guess this is the third form of Panda that we haven't seen yet, which I was kind of expecting that he'd have to do in order to mount some kind of offense against Kashimo, since the gorilla form is doing nothing. It's not revealed what it is in this chapter, and judging off of this text, we might not even clearly be able to make out what it is. But apparently it explodes due to Kashimo's lightning, and the leaker says that it's quite grotesque. And then Kashimo says, "Where's Sukuna?" So now if we go over to the other part of Ducky spoilers, he says that the chapter ends with Kashimo asking Panda, "You're Sukuna," and Panda replies with, "You're Angel." Angel in reference to Hanakurusu, the player who has the ability to nullify like curse techniques and whatnot. And before the calling game started, they kind of orchestrated this strategy with Tengen to get her to use her ability on the prison realm to free Gojo, but then we saw that she wound up encountering Megumi and he was like knocked out or something. We still don't know what's going on with that storyline yet, but Ducky's not saying anything about Panda getting exploded by Kashimo's lightning, which apparently is Kashimo's cursed power, because Miyamura says there's an explanation about it, but not about the curse technique. And it's related to electricity like Kahlua from Hunter x Hunter. So that's super interesting, because that kind of lines up with the elemental abilities that we've been seeing from the serious sorcerers. Because we saw that Sukuna could like manipulate fire outside of his two implied curse techniques that he already had, and Urarame could like manipulate ice, although we don't really know much about that character. We don't know if that is literally their curse technique yet. It could be something similar to like what Sukuna is doing, and now that we see this electricity stuff, this might line up with that. Like this might not be Kashimo's like straight up inherent curse technique, but somehow they can manipulate like an electricity ability outside of that. Like that might be like the super high level of jujitsu. Like you can just start manipulating elements or something like that. Or at least it just seems like that is what's going on with that power set. But I'm super interested to see what happens in this chapter. Again, guys, take it with a grain of salt, because we don't know if Panda is dying. I mean, even if this is true and he is getting like lightning bolted and he's exploding, I doubt that would be the end of Panda, because he still needs to have like his big, you know, fulfillment as a character, right? Especially coming off of him witnessing Masamichi dying, his father, and they'd had that whole big, you know, sad moment to it. It would be kind of anticlimactic for Panda to just die here, you know what I mean? But I'm not putting it off the table that he gets exploded and then, I don't know, maybe his sister form allows him to come back from this or something. I don't know, but let me know what you think about this chapter in the comments, guys, and if you liked it, please give it a like and please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day. I'll see you in the next one.